There's no place like home. Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz repeated this phrase over and over again until she woke up to reality in her bed back in Kansas. Sometimes I think that all of humanity needs to do something similar, to remind ourselves that there is no place like home. There's no place like this earth. And if we don't wake up to that reality, we'll forever be lost in the land of wizards and witches and heartless tin men. There's no place like home, and yet we don't treat our own homes like we treat others' homes. When we visit or stay with someone, whether they are a new acquaintance, a good friend, or a family member, we pick up after ourselves, we don't eat all of their food, we're respectful of the space, and we sometimes bring a gift to show our gratitude for their hospitality. Do you do these things in your own home? I know I don't. Home is where we have dominion. We leave our stuff laying around, consume as much as we want. Perhaps don't keep up with the maintenance as we should. We get used to our own brand of messiness. We don't usually look at it as a place to be respected and cared for in the way that we do when we're at someone else's home. It's just where we live, and it's there to meet our needs. As Robert Weston wrote in the reading that Aaron shared, each knows a little corner of the world and lives as if it is her all. But what if we treated our home, the physical structure and the earth that we live on, as if others lived there too? As if it were a space that we share with other forms of life that are affected by what we do and what we don't do. As if we were guests in this place for but a short time, because we do know that each of us will live likely no more than 100 years, whereas our earth home has been alive for over 4.5 billion. Living like we truly believe there is no place like home requires us to go out of our way, to avoid the easy path of thinking only of ourselves. I learned this from my parents, who for as long as I know have incorporated sustainability into their daily lives in quiet but important ways. It seemed normal to me growing up because that's just the way it was. But when I think back on the amount of time that my parents spent carting recyclables around, I'm amazed. For years before my mother's workplace started recycling, she brought paper grocery sacks full of paper cans and bottles home to put out on the curb for city recycling. My dad saved all sorts of little containers to store nails and screws in the workshop and spices and other goods in the kitchen. They've always composted before it was cool. And I would sometimes play in the yard waste compost pile when I was a kid. It was a lot of fun. I chuckle when I think back to how I took on this cause when I was in high school. As a 15-year-old, I spent a couple weeks one summer volunteering at the youth office of our Unitarian Universalist Association in Boston. One of my tasks was to go through piles and piles of outdated training binders and such, tossing those that they didn't need anymore. And I was horrified to learn that at the time, they did not recycle. So every day, I carted tote bags of paper on the commuter rail back to my cousin's house where I was staying. Like mother, like daughter, I guess. It certainly wasn't the easy way, but it felt normal. Even since I was a child and a teen, we've learned so much more about our natural environment and the impact that we have on it. Scientists warn us that we are causing irreparable climate change that is damaging the earth. We can see the effects right before our eyes. The natural resources, water, food, and energy sources that we have on this planet are not equitably shared. And the impact is felt not just by the earth and the processes of nature, but also by the life supported by those processes, and that includes us. Some say that we shouldn't worry so much about the earth disappearing from under our feet, but more about us disappearing from the face of the earth. It is people and other life forms who are most threatened. The earth will still be here long after we are gone. We each make individual decisions that affect our Earth, both positively and negatively. And when faced with the enormity of our environmental problem, the disrepair of our Earth home, we might say, I sometimes feel, and perhaps you do as well, that my actions to care for the Earth are a drop in the bucket. What's the point when the problem is so huge? In seminary, I took a course seeking to explore this more on how diverse religious traditions relate to the Earth and see their role in its care. And the professor, Paul Knitter, suggested that similar to Thich Nhat Hanh's saying that in order to make peace, we must be peace, perhaps we can say, in order to save the Earth must save us. This statement's lingered with me. In order to save the Earth must save us. Now, we typically see ourselves, human beings, as the primary agents, the ones who are going to make all this right again and save the Earth for us all. Yes, we can, and we need the Earth to save us from ourselves, to wake us up to the reality of this place that we call home. First of all, the Earth saves us from being by ourselves. The web of life supported by our Earth is interconnected, and we are an integral part of it. In fact, we depend on it for our food and for all that helps us live and thrive. Unfortunately, we seem to recognize this most clearly when something goes wrong. When habitats are destroyed, when food and water sources are poisoned, or when climate change causes mosquitoes carrying dangerous viruses to migrate to the region we call home. Our reading says that we live in a web of shimmering beauty. And when we try to take too much of that beauty for ourselves, the Earth reminds us that it was not meant to be so. This is the point illustrated by Dr. Seuss's book, The Lorax. It's one of those stories that is enjoyed by children and adults alike, perhaps even more so by adults because of its deeper message. It's a story of the destruction of beautiful trees in order to manufacture thneeds, a fine something that all people need. The Lorax is a creature who speaks for the trees against the greedy thneed maker, the Onceler. After cutting down all the trees and polluting the town, the people moved away because there was nothing left for them there. The Onceler was alone in a mess of his own making, until a young boy came along to ask how things came to be so. The treeless landscape and smog-filled sky were a reminder that the environment and the trees were not there just for the Onceler, though he didn't realize that until it was almost too late. The scene that I read from the very end of the story offers a glimpse of hope. There was one remaining truffula seed. The boy has the opportunity to make a difference, to take up his part in the web of life by being a planter, to save himself and his town. He, in turn, will be saved by the new life that the Earth makes possible, and by the return of the townspeople and the Lorax. He won't be alone anymore. The Earth also saves us with its beauty and its power. It's easy to wallow in despair about the destruction of the environment without noticing the growth and possibility that's sprouting around us. The destructive power of nature certainly motivates us to respond. Its ability to form tornadoes and hurricanes and to throw hail through roofs catalyzes us into action to reverse the trends of climate change. But I think that the power of nature to create beauty and life is and can be a similarly strong motivator. Have you ever seen a wind farm? They are anywhere from a few to dozens of wind turbines, each of them a couple 100 feet tall, scattered across fields like stalks of corn. Depending on the wind speed, the blades may be still or slowly turning or whipping around at a pretty good speed for something that weighs thousands of pounds. Texas produces the most wind power of any state in our country. And in 2014, wind power made up 9% of the electricity generated here. Imagine the possibilities. I grew up in an area that also had an abundance of wind farms, so they were just another one of those normal environmental elements of my childhood. My family visited wind farms, not something most people do on family trips. My mom was involved in developing some of them in Western New York, and so we would go and check in on them on our way home from visiting my grandparents. Driving down a small road, nothing except for a couple of farms in sight. And then over a hill we'd come, and all of a sudden, there they were. Enormous and multiplying, it seemed, as we got closer. We took a turn off the main road and onto a dirt road, slowly approaching the turbines, which by then towered over us. We'd get out of the car, walk up to them, craning our necks to see the blades right over our heads. And after a while, we'd get in the car and head back to the city. At the time, I couldn't be bothered. Wandering around under these magnificent structures, dragging my feet, I'd say, "Can't we just go home?" In retrospect, however, I'm grateful that I had this experience. Now, whenever I see wind farms, I have quite a different reaction. They are awesome. They're striking. It amazes me how much power the wind can produce. Now, this is a bit of a side note, but please hear this, lest you think that your attempts to teach kids about environmentalism and the beauty of this earth are falling flat. Have hope. Your words and actions do have a lasting impact on them, even if not immediately apparent. If you show them and teach them that this earth is their home, that they belong here, and that they're part of something larger for which they can care for and show respect, they will get the message. I, for one, am proof of that. We know that the wind is powerful and it's a resource that can't be depleted. So then why doesn't wind power make up more than 9% of what we generate? Probably because other forms of power can be faster, easier, and cheaper to produce. This is the struggle that I think a lot of us face, even those of us raised in intentionally environmentalist ways and committed as adults to sustainable living. It's a dilemma of convenience. Sometimes it's more convenient to just throw away waste that could be recycled or composted. It's more convenient to drive than it is to take public transportation. As our first reading says, though, our folly is that we so soon forget. We forget that our actions in the name of convenience affect the web of life. So this is what I mean when I say we are saved by the earth. If we pay attention, the earth reminds us in subtle and not so subtle ways. It tugs at us to do better in our care and stewardship of its resources. We are saved by our earth, and we, in turn, must work to save it. Not just in a material sense, but also in the spiritual or religious sense of healing and wholeness. Unitarian Universalists tend to approach salvation as something that is participatory, not something that comes down from above or occurs in the beyond. We are in this together, and therefore it's our collective wisdom, power, and actions that help bring about healing and wholeness. And this is why we as a church embrace environmental stewardship as a religious practice. This morning, in honor of Earth Day this week, our church's Climate Action Team and Food Matters group are sponsoring activities that will help us integrate the religious practice of environmental stewardship into our home life. Whether it's about supporting the habitats of animals, examining what we eat and where it comes from, or using the power of the sun to make an oven. What we can learn are ways of contributing to the healing and wholeness of the earth and our relationship with life. The poet Denise Levertov wrote, "But we have only begun to love the earth. We have only begun to imagine the fullness of life. We have only begun to know the power that is in us if we would join our solitudes in the communion of struggle." She's right. There is power in the beauty of the earth and in the ways that we live on it like gardening or harnessing the power of wind. But in order to imagine and to live into the fullness of life and to save the earth, we must, as my professor says, be saved by the earth, by its beauty, by the wonder of its interconnectedness, and by its power to hold us in the web of life, no matter how far we may try to stretch it. There is no place like home. So let us return to it faithfully, again and again and again.